at the end. Right, friends, how are we going to do this? What normally happens is, I talk a bit about how I ended up doing Modern CI and a bit about my background as a fan and a writer. But we've done that a lot, so I don't know if you want to hear that again. The very potted, short version of this is, from a Modern CI sort of background, IDW background, that and a fan background. I was there at the beginning, ish. I know 84 was year zero, and I was aware of the launch of the brand, and I caught a few episodes on British TV. We had 4 channels, on Channel 3, and they used to chop up the episodes, and I remember seeing the first bit of the first episode, and the Ark and the 4 million years bit. That stayed in my memory. But I didn't really get into the toys until a couple of years later when I got Blitzwing as a present, and then things really kicked in for me fandom-wise. I really lost my soul to the whole Transformers thing with the UK comic, and this is a weekly comic, Simon Furman, and some great artists, and it was issue 113, hence the sort of totemic significance of that number within all the mid-CI. Issue 113, first appearance of Death's Head. It was like a sequel to the movie. It was a good jumping on point. You can't, nobody. I defy anybody to pick that issue up and not, still be here years later. So, and then when the UK comic folded, which was a few months after the American comic ended, because we were reprinting stuff. So early '92, the UK comic finished. And on the back of a letter in the comic about this club called Transmasters, myself and some other like-minded fans started writing to each other and swapping fanzines and doing stories, doing fanfic and some artwork, and just keeping the flame burning, thinking that was, as you would, that was it, and we continue to tell stories together because there'd never ever be any official fiction coming out. At least the toys ran for a few more years. And there was a US branch of Transmasters too, and it was much more fragmented, and everyone sort of had their own universe within which to write stories. But I think what marked the UK branch out as different was that we were all working together, collaboratively, and telling stories within the Marvel, what I would call the Marvel UK universe. And that discipline stood me in good stead, in later years. So we did that for a few years, and I did a lot of sort of progressively more ambitious fan fiction and things, culminating in this novel-length folly called Eugenesis, which I remember taking to a UK convention years and years ago, and it was all unofficial, not for profit. It was just for fun, and that sort of got it all out of my system in terms of telling stories about Transformers for a while, and I sort of lost touch with the. What was it? Dreamwave had it, didn't it? So I wasn't around really for that. I wasn't really a reader when IDW got the license either. And it was only when my friend Rick Roach, who was another Transmasters member, when he got his first break with IDW doing the pictures on the letters page, and then the covers, then the interiors, and then he got the Spotlight Cup gig and so on. He mentioned my name at IDW. He sort of ran a script past me for feedback, which was the everything in its right place. And then, when there was a vacancy for a co-writer on Wreckers, he persuaded them to give me a go, and I've been pitching things in the meantime, so it all came together then. Flash forward, all the mid-CI, here we are today. Any questions? And we've got one.
He does have one. Don't be what's other one. Since this is Chicago, we can do this Oprah style.
We win prizes? Yes!
Yeah, stand up first. Look under your chair. Look under your chair. Well, I made you all move, so it'd be really rude of me to make you move again.
Thank you. My question is, with Spotlight Trail Cutter, was that originally supposed to be an issue more than meets the eye that you parsed off? Because the whole last wave of Spotlights, good stories, but they're kind of their own thing. But Trail Cutter just kind of required reading for more than meets the eye.
Yeah. The short answer is no, it wasn't. I mean, it was, but it became that thing. The Spotlights were, John and I were sort of motoring along with our respective titles, and then there was a request, essentially an order for 6 issues to accompany 6 toys, and and John, when John spoke to me, he said, you know, let's divvy up these 6 characters as follows. And because Trail Cutter was on the Lost Light, Hoist was on the Lost Light, and because I'd done things with packs before, those were my 3. John and I decided the 6 stories would be would be interlinked to various degrees, a bit like the 3 Colours Red trilogy and other things like that. So the idea was that, you know, packs would tie in with Hoist, and also the Hoist and Trail Cutter things coming at the end of those 6 issues could be in the present day, which tied in with the Lost Light stuff. I mean, I'm happy with those 3 issues, but Trail Cutter is my favourite of those 3, and I don't know, it was all about finding spaces to tell stories within, because by that point, I don't know what issue we were on, but, you know, we were probably past Shadow Play, probably into the teens of More Than Meets the Eye, and there's a few gaps along the way. Another one is around issues 12 and 13, where you can slot stories in, so this was between issues 5 and 6, wasn't it, where it takes place. So between issues 5 and 6 and 12 and 13ish, there's still space to tell stories. Trail Cutter fitted in neatly, and I don't know, it just came together as the type of fun, essentially light-hearted, ship-based story that it's good to tell from time to time. And Matt Frank did an amazing job on the art, and everyone says that he captures the essence of the series. So yeah, that's the longer answer to it. But,
Who else is he? There's this guy.
Hi there. Considering what you've done with Chrome Jump and Eject, before those 2 came along, I always figured...
Rewind.
I always figured... I'm sorry, I'm so sorry.
You won't be the last. But I did take that as an insult. So.
I'm sorry.
I'll make more of an effort to make them more memorable.
Okay, my question. Before those 2 came along, I always figured the canon gay couple of Transformers was Grapple and Hoist. Have you ever considered, since Hoist is on the ship, have you ever considered doing anything with them too?
As a gay couple?
Or just those 2 together? Because I just find them hilarious together.
Well, see, I think that probably highlights a difference in how, maybe in British and American readership or audiences, because, like I say, we didn't get to see much of the cartoon in Britain. We never saw season 3. That wasn't ever aired terrestrially. So yeah, everything was really for us, or for my generation, because I'm old now, was filtered through the UK comic, and so we had a different set of pairings and relationships. There'll be people in here that can far more quickly name other sort of groups in the cartoon than I can. But I mean, even Sideswipe and Sunstreaker didn't really have that parallel in the UK comic. We had Inferno and Smokescreen in the UK comic. So a lot of that stuff, which is sort of in the fandom consciousness on this side of the pond, isn't really there in the UK. Yeah. So, you know, there's lots of. I do tend to think of you know, the character interplay in pairings. You know, and there's a lot of. You could all do like a cat's cradle of couples, really, in the broadest sense of the word. People that sort of hang out together on the Lost Light, and I think I'm going to continue doing it that way. I mean, it goes back to the early issues with Swerve and Skids. You know, they just sort of coalesce in little droplets coming together. There's a lot of hands up. That's a good thing.
All right, so you had introduced this concept of Domus Ambus, and just kind of the idea of houses in Cybertronian society. So I was a little bit curious about how those worked. Are they just based on just those 2 brothers, or does it have a wider scope? Is it based on some sort of relational, like generational relational thing, or is it more something chosen? How does that work?
That's like a multiple choice, which is good because I haven't really thought this through. No, I have a little. It is a mixture of some of those things. It's the Spark Brother thing is a big part of it, and we haven't really explored what it means. Is there a biological definition of Spark Brother or not? Because we've had you know, with the jump starters, we had a literal connection between the sparks, and a Spark Brother wouldn't go as far as that, but there's some sort of, as I look at it, some sort of biological affinity between Dominus and Minimus and others. And maybe that's where the grouping comes from. To be honest, when I did that, I almost had in mind that they occupy a sort of a higher tier. It's a higher societal tier in Cybertronian society. So they're sort of maybe not like noblemen, but that type of there's distinctions within society. And not everyone has a house, but if you do have a house, if there's a grouping, it sort of betrays a slightly higher standing. Now, whether that's compatible with functionism, it's a different discussion to have. But that's I was more coming at it from that way than a sort of a physical or biological link.
So we have seen, I don't know what the time frame would be from the cartoon G1 to what's going on now in Robots in Disguise and More Than Meets the Eye. Maybe say that's 20, 30 years, and then we've seen clips of the start of the war. You talk about the war being 4 million years. How much of that do you folks at IDW have, obviously you can't have every single beat mapped out, but how much of that do you have mapped out, and how much of that do you want to go ahead and show and display, and how much of it do you just chalk up to, yeah, they were shooting at each other?
That's a good question. I mean, what's interesting here is that when IDW acquired the license and Simon started, sketching out his what I would call the infiltration era. I mean, it wasn't established that that they'd been fighting for 4 million years. I think it was only in the later stages of Mike Costa's run. Please correct me if I've got that wrong, but it was sort of years into IDW having the license that almost as a sort of throwaway thing. Maybe it was a sort of subconscious echo of the cartoon, but that's the 4 million came in then, and suddenly, you're not a slave. I don't mean you're a slave to it, but suddenly that was canon. That's what we were working with. I think prior to that, from IDW's sort of editorial perspective, the war had been going on for a few 100,000 years and not 4 million. 4 million is just, I don't know, it's one of those things. You could argue it's faintly ridiculous because that's a huge amount of time. Equally, I mean, if you're going to have a 4 million years war, let's at least have it with pseudo-immortal mechanical beings that could, at a stretch, could be fighting for that long. We haven't filled in. We haven't got a sort of one big timeline where we've got these big events. It's weird, really, because we've got a huge temporal sandpit to play in, and yet there's a lot of activity around the pre-war Megatron Origins, Shadow Play, Chaos Theory time, and now the Primacy and Autocracy, and so on. So we're sort of almost fighting for space around there. We could stretch out and tell more stories in between. In the Scavengers issues. Issues, I think it was issue 7 in particular, we talked about sort of, and earlier actually in More Than Meets the Eye, we talked about these different phases of the war and these major epochs, and that was sort of my attempt to sort of demarcate and sort of split up these 4 million years and give it some sort of structure. And one of those epochs is, I think, certainly we've mentioned the Remote Age, and we talked about Megatron and Prime essentially orchestrating the war. And the war is now spreading across lots and lots of different planets, essentially in these sort of information hubs, wide. And this is where I would play up the robotic side or the mechanical side of their nature. They're just taking in unbelievable amounts of information and processing it, and they're devoting all their energy to that and marshalling these armies of potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of soldiers across this massive galactic battleground. And so I think that happened for a long, long time. And equally, and I don't know if this is reflected in an actual issue yet or anything I've written yet, but my take on it, my headcanon, is that there was also these huge periods where very little happened. If you're operating on this type of timescale, if you're a mechanical being, and I know we do talk in weeks and days and afternoons for ease of understanding in the comic, but you could have a battle that rages for a few hours. And then you could have a few centuries when both sides are recovering, rebuilding, and preparing for the next fight. So fits and starts, I think, across those 4 million years.
I know we're not going to get any spoilers, so
who knows? Maybe.
Well, I hope so.
We can just keep it between us in this room.
It's a small room. So I came up with this question of if there was a band aboard the Lost Light, who would be in it and what would it be called? No pressure.
I realise that makes me. I have to think creatively now. Who'd be in it? Rodimus would be in it. Whether anyone else liked it or not. So he'd be up front. He would. But it wouldn't be really. It wouldn't be amped up very well. It would just be. He thinks it'd be like the Manic Street Preachers. He thinks he's playing it, but it's just really for show. It's probably not plugged in. And you know what it would look like as well. I mean, it would just be the flames on his chest. I think he'd have like a Marty McFly attitude to it as well. He'd wig out. People say that? Is that old? It's very old. Yeah, it'll come back into fashion. So that's Prime's there, and I think Drift would be in it too. Drift would write most of the music, and he'd be forever trying to fend off Rodimus's. Rodimus would write these torturous lyrics about it. Rodimus would. Sorry, I'm riffing on this now. Rodimus would. Often he'd write pretty straightforward, Ramones type songs. Then he'd have a period of sort of deep feeling, and he'd want to pour his heart out into these songs, and it would be embarrassing. And other people would try and talk him down. I think Ratchet would be on drums actually. Ratchet's got a steady hand, Right. He'd be good with the rhythm.
How about Groove on bass?
Well, now season 2, Groove's there. I'll take that. Groove on bass. Cyclonus is the lead singer.
Yeah.
If it was some sort of industrial death metal, that's true. What genre of music would they play? Who have I missed out? Have we got our band there? And of course, and this is someone else's idea. I'm sorry, but they'd be called. If the name wasn't already taken, they'd be called Motley Crue.
For them, it's not taken.
That's in universe. You're right.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Swerve would insist on a name.
That's true. That's true. I'll come back to that. I'm sweating creativity here. I have given and given. So I'm spent now. Good question.
Okay. So far, I think the best thing I've liked about the new comics is how you've written in a lot of things that weren't really addressed before. But one of them that really stuck out for me was this Galaxy Federation. What is exactly their significance, and will they actually have any more major parts to roll beyond occasional background antagonists?
It's the Galactic Council we're talking about. Yeah, Galactic Council.
Sorry.
No, it's there will be more from them. They function as a sort of vaguely malevolent background presence at the moment, which is the case for a lot of things in Modern MCI, it seems. But they're like a backdrop to a lot of what goes on. I think if you look at their appearances to date, particularly in the annual, and Magnus has talked about them as well, I think in issue 2 or 3, they're like a government level protectionist racket. Really, they will protect you from the threat of mechanicals, principally Transformers or Cybertronians, but for a price. And I'm not saying it's not like an extortion thing, but there's a reference I think in the annual to taxation, and it's along those lines really. You have to pay the council an amount of money, and they use that money in part to create weapons such as the one you see in the Hoist spotlight and stuff like that. So that's as much as I'll say. Pardon?
So they're kind of like the Vogons.
I don't know. See, I'm culturally barren outside of Transformers. I don't.
Sorry, they're the bureaucratic idiots from Hitchhiker's Guide.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yes. But feel free to remind me of other things that I haven't thought up myself without realising it. No, we'll see more of them. And the Black Bloc Consortia, the other sort of galaxy-wide bureaucratic group as well. They mentioned in Dark Cybertron and in the latest issue out on Wednesday.
Hi there. Did you always want to be a writer when you were growing up? Was this like your dream job as a kid?
Yeah, and you should see my school jotter for appalling and interminable stories, mainly but not exclusively about Transformers. But yeah. In fact, I wrote this excruciating fanfic aged about 10, I think, called Doomsday. It was all very... the Furman's fervour was channeled through me, so everything was apocalyptic that I wrote about. I've still got it at home, actually, and it's basically an excuse to write about the double target masters, everyone's favourite characters. It's whatever toys had come out at the time. They obviously, the likes of Scoop and is it Landfill? Yeah, they were central to saving the universe, as you can imagine, in Doomsday. And no, it's always been, writing's always been where it's at for me.
I'm going back and I'm going back.
So I just want to ask: is it a coincidence that Lost Light somehow looks like Megatron?
Someone showed me a picture of because we've got the Rod Pod, which is Rodimus's face, and then someone showed me that it doesn't take much to turn the Lost Light into Megatron, but
is it a coincidence?
Yeah. Well, when Nick Roach designed the Lost Light, we didn't know the Megatron was going to come along and be co-captain. Sorry, Rodimus, co-captain. It's obviously meant to be.
Okay, thank you.
There's this great tradition in Transformers by now of pseudo-Greek and Latin, and I've loved the additions that you've made to that. So I wanted to ask about the process for some of the new terms you've come up with. Mostly Latin I can think of. Your question. But what kind of connotations and words you look for?
I guess the more we drill down into this, the less mysterious it seems, and the more of a get-out clause it seems to me, how can I answer this? First and foremost, I've mentioned this before, but the dialogue you're reading sort of goes through like a TARDIS translation circuit type thing. So we're reading Cybertronian, spoken Cybertronian, translated as best it can be into English, and there you get some colloquialisms and certain idioms creeping in. And that's fine, but it becomes hard to argue that when you have, as you say, some sort of Latin or Greco-Latin words creeping in too. That's when I sort of have my cake and eat it, because there are certain Latin words that conjure up just enough information and carry just enough connotations to set them apart from a direct English equivalent. And sometimes you want that linguistic space to play in, particularly when it comes to conjuncts and dura and so on. So, I'll have that slight ambiguity, and I'll have that scope for interpretation by the reader, and we'll use that to our advantage. That's really where it comes from.
So at the end of season 1, we see the Scavengers aboard their ship playing what looked like space Jenga. Do they have any other board games on board the ship, and what are they?
This is the Scavengers' life, okay? They're on their ship, they're bored most of the time, and they go to the equivalent of like the toy cupboard, and of course there's only one thing in it. That just sums up their... whose job was it to stock up the toy cupboard with games? Because all we've got is Space Jenga. And that's pretty much their role in life. And then there's pieces missing, of course. I think that's Alex's. I think I just said Grimlock stacking building blocks, and Alex turned it into Space Jenga. That's how you've got to say it. Because it's like Jenga in space. Space Jenga Extreme. It's the same, slightly sharper edges to the
So when they fall.
Thank you.
Hey, I've heard rumors that Powerglide was originally intended to have a more prominent role And if that's true, I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what was perhaps intended or what was thought about that didn't get a chance to turn out.
Powerglide was going to be the tailgate figure. Tailgate took Powerglide's place in the end, and there's a simple explanation for that, and it's down to me being silly. When I was putting together the cast for More Than Meets the Eye, and I'd had in mind for a long time this idea of a character that was unwittingly, without realising it, sort of slept through the war. It goes back to some of the pictures I made before Wreckers, about this. I was asked to put together a series of, actually no, it was after Wreckers, but before Chaos Theory, and I was asked to pitch some ideas for a digital-only set of stories called War Stories. There'd be about 5 or 6 pages each. And so I had several sort of Twilight Zone-y, twisty stories, and one of which was going to be a character who, there's a pre-war sequence, he had an accident, and then in the original pitch he woke up and it was in the middle of one of the climactic All Hail Megatron fights. So I recycled that idea from More Than Meets the Eye, and to be honest, it was a case of looking at the characters that hadn't at that point been used anywhere else. Because of course, given this conceit, I couldn't, it had to be someone that we'd not read about in the IDW universe before. And Powerglide was one of the few people that were left, and that was all fine until Mike Costa and I were collaborating on the plot for Chaos, and Mike was scripting it, and I was involved in some of the plotting. And I think one of the scripts had said, there's, at this point the Autobots with aerial modes attack. It may have been attack, Delphi or. Not Delphi.
Kima.
Help me.
Kima?
Kima. Yes, exactly. It's almost receding into the past and stuff. And so I just gave him a list of Autobots that could fly, and I put Powerglide in there and robbed myself of him at the same time. But it all turned out for the best. I can't imagine Tailgate not being Tailgate now. I can't imagine that character being Powerglide. So.
But would there have been any differences as far as personality with
Would there have been any differences in his person? Yeah, well, I'd like to think so. I mean, yeah, I'd hope so. I mean, it's the way. I mean, actually, as it turns out, Alex's design for Powerglide's a hulking grey, mechanoid, and the essence of Tailgate's character is that he's small and he's naive and he's doing his best with the big boys, and that's not Powerglide. So yeah, as I say, I think it turned out better.
Hi. I just wanted to ask you about, you've been kind of, you talked before about filling in the backstory of the war and everything, and I noticed in issue 31 you talked a little bit about how the Autobot army was being swelled, the ranks were being swelled, sparks were being immediately implanted and sent off to war. It made me think about World War I, where people are continually sent to the front lines just to die, essentially. And how do you think that, do you envision that kind of everyone in the Autobot command had some kind of moral issues with that? There's no mention of Optimus Prime at that point. I mean, he's leader, and he's essentially sending newborns into the front lines to be killed, and it's a little, the implication is that the Autobots are still not as noble as you'd expect them to be.